Hi and welcome to episode 4 of Tech Horizons. My name's Madeline Skillen, I'm the Regional Marketing Manager at Procore Technologies, and today we'll be talking about the impact of tech on the regulatory environment. Joining me today is John Shenton, Chair of the Dubai Hub of the Chartered Institute of Building and Contracts Manager at Averda. Hi John, lovely to have you here today. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Maddie.
Good.
So I'm a Chartered Construction Manager. I'm also the Regional Contract Manager for the GCC for Averda, who are one of the largest waste management and recycling companies that operate in the emerging world. Averda seeks to provide sustainable solutions that extract value from waste, reduce the use of the planet's finite natural resources and drive the circular economy. And as you've identified, I'm also chair of the Dubai Hub for the Chartered Institute of Building, which is the largest professional body for construction management in the world. Now, whether it's the Red Sea development in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Merdeka 118 in Kuala Lumpur, or the conservation of a heritage building in the United Kingdom, you will find a CIOB member grappling with the issues of digitalisation during the implementation of that project. I began my career with the built environment in the United Kingdom, developing real estate, and I've transitioned overseas. And while I am comparatively shorter in the tooth than my colleagues, the rampant change that I have seen in terms of work systems, workflows and methods of AI in the last few years suggest to me that technology is being implemented very effectively within the construction industry.
Wow, well, that sounds like two incredibly interesting roles and incredibly impactful as well on, the construction environment. Talking about the construction landscape and more specifically the regulatory environment within this region, could you give me just a quick overview of kind of where we stand in comparison to other global regions?
Certainly. Well, I suppose it depends on who is procuring the work. In other regions of the world, you have a government or a public mandate that governs the implementation of a solution. So by way of example, in the United Kingdom, we have a construction strategy that was launched in the noughties that identified that any construction company that was looking to work on a government project had to achieve BIM certification to level 2. What this practically requires is that a 3D BIM model is used to detail every characteristic of that building or that engineering project. During the next phase of delivery, the mandate identifies that each firm needs to achieve BIM level 3. Now, within the UAE, which is typically tended to be a little bit further ahead of the curve than other markets or jurisdictions, there is a BIM mandate from Dubai Municipality.
Okay.
There is a requirement for BIM with the Roads and Transport Authority, but also I suppose if we look across to Saudi Arabia and what's going on with the Saudi Gigaprojects program, Red Sea Global have made a lot of noise about their progress in terms of BIM implementation.
In terms of tech then, and the usage of tech in order to maintain regulatory compliance and indeed improve those standards, where are you seeing countries move the needle the most?
Well, I was fortunate enough last night, as part of the CIOB, we host a number of events. Alison Wicks, who's my vice chair on the Dubai Hub, was presenting on quality last night. She hosted a quality roadshow workshop, and she spoke at length about the effect of ISO 9001, which regulates quality management systems and its rollout, and the effect that that was having, the use of pads and other devices on site to identify defects and items of work that needed to be corrected. And I think that's something which has been reflected across the industry at a site level.
We talk a lot about standardization when we talk about construction technology more specifically and project management. How do you see tech impacting that area? And how is that kind of helping to positively, obviously, be of advantage to the regulatory environment?
Well, I think it all comes down to digitisation. I think I've obviously touched on quality, and we've identified that there's been a significant impact on quality, but also the digitisation's had a very, very strong impact on health, safety and environmental processes. We use drones on site now to identify where the resource is and if there are any potential for lost time incidents. We have training that's delivered now through digital content, which provides huge savings for companies. And we're on the vanguard of using wearable technologies to monitor the health and well-being of our resource. Now, one of the most interesting things I've seen actually within the last 4 months, I attended something called Members Forum in Liverpool.
Okay.
So the CIOB gathers their more prominent members together to explore issues that affect the construction industry. And we were introduced to something called Spot the Dog. Now, that's a £150,000 bit of kit that is appropriate for doing surveying activities in buildings that are classified as dirty, dull or dangerous. It's a fully autonomous robot dog. It conducts site walks. It has a number of different capabilities. And in some ways, I think that's probably been something that the most impactful thing I've seen certainly this year.
How do you see construction technology playing a part in the risk mitigation of the regulatory environment?
Well, in terms of risk mitigation, I suppose you're speaking to a contract manager. So I'm always going to be my first, my hobby horse is it starts with your contract, stupid. We need a system of contracts that define how individual sections of work that form part of the larger project are completed. And we, to a certain extent, we have that, but they haven't been effectively tied together in a way that correctly manages all of the risks that are associated with the development of a built asset. If you work on contracts in the Middle East or on contracts with an international profile, then you're more than likely to come into contact with the FIDIC suite. Mm-hmm. There was an updated suite published in 2017, and there were admittedly some revisions to that reflected the developments in building information modelling and the effect that has on programs. But I think what we're missing at the moment is a form of contract that can accurately bring all of the supply chain together and accurately model all of the risks.
And when you talk about bringing the supply chain together, you are referring to data and people, or are you referring just to data itself and the integration of that data?
I think I'm probably talking about both. I think in terms of defining data and identifying where data is stored, that's probably something that might not be most effectively done through contract, but possibly through employer's requirements document or an addendum to the contract.
Do you see any particular challenges that to the bettering of building practices within the region?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a stronger degree of integration of different systems. Obviously, there needs to be a greater degree of digitalisation. I would identify that the main source of disputes on construction projects arise from changes and also from claims from events. We need digital tools. We need forms of digital project communications. And we also need a greater role for artificial intelligence and machine learning in terms of generating meeting reports and insights.
I was speaking to somebody the other day in the office, and I was talking about the conversation that we would be having today. And he mentioned that one of the biggest challenges with integration is that in a regulatory environment, sometimes you have to backdate a lot of the decisions that you've made in that moment. And that can go up to 10 years ago. And that can be very difficult if you're now working on digital, but you used to work kind of on more of a paper-based system. Do you see any of that kind of come into play? I mean, could you potentially touch upon how standardization and digitalization is definitely helping with that auditing trail?
I think if I touch on the earlier part of your comment, certainly I think you have an employer's requirements document which might set out the digital expectations or the strategy on a project. And by the time you've gone through the tender process and that you've mobilised, the client's expectations and actually what's achievable may well have developed. And that's, if I'd done my contractor's hat on, that's very, very much a change to which I'd be entitled to a variation order for. It's a fast-moving space. It's a fast-moving ecosystem, and I just hope that we need to have the contractual tools in place to deal with that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So in your role at Averda as a contracts manager, you are dealing a lot with waste management. Could you tell me a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, certainly. So within Averda, we work in emerging market economies or frontier market economies, and we're seeking to provide sustainable solutions that extract value from waste. Mm-hmm. Now, what that means practically, I'm very much involved with the Saudi Giga project program at the moment. Averda picked up phase 0 of the Red Sea development, and Red Sea Global have a zero waste to landfill policy across their development. Now, for anybody who's not familiar with the Red Sea development, it's slightly smaller than Belgium, slightly larger than Albania, and you have a zero waste to landfill policy there.
I don't think people realise how large that is. When they talk about the Red Sea development, I don't think they realise the scale of it. It's interesting that you've just pointed it out as well.
So what that practically means is when you're dealing with your construction and demolition waste, when you're dealing with your municipal solid waste, when you're dealing with your organics, You're trying to find composting solutions. You're trying to extract as much as you can that can be turned into recyclables. And you, in essence, are attempting to magnify a circular economy. Now, that zero waste to landfill policy has been reflected across the Saudi PIF gigaprojects program, and you'll see elements of it in Amala, in NEOM, and it's increasingly turning up in the because obviously we're a little earlier in the curve, in the tendering documents for a number of the other ambitious projects that are being procured in that part of the world.
Okay, and how is technology playing a role in waste management then, and the work that you're doing with all of these great projects?
Well, it's process engineering, isn't it? And to efficiently manage those processes, you need the best quality information and the inputs and best quality inputs during that design phase. There is a strong degree of digitalization. There's an appetite to embrace AI and machine learning, and that's helping to improve the design process. And obviously we're a little earlier in the curve. I think we obviously just delivered the integrated waste management facility for phase 0, very, very actively involved with phase 1. I think that you'll see the waste infrastructure that's developed within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as part of the Giga Projects program over the next few years, doing a much more efficient job of magnifying a circular economy.
So shifting gears a little bit onto dispute resolution, because I know that you have some experience in this also. So really trying to unpick this a little bit more. What do you think is key to minimising disputes and resolving issues more quickly?
I think clear communication, and going back to my earlier point, it all starts with a contract. So if your obligations are clearly drafted in a document that accurately reflects what was discussed during the development of your bid and during the negotiation, then I think you're some way to resolving those issues. Now, I've touched on the issue of claims and variations. You need to have a strong claim clause. You need to have a strong dispute resolution clause that actually sets out a tiered method of dispute resolution. And then you also need to have a sophisticated change management process in place that allows you to administer changes and to price changes as they occur on your project and under your contract.
How do you foresee tech helping to support that clearer communication?
Well, I touched on the topic of digital communications. I certainly think that's one area, and also AI-generated meeting reports and insights. Certainly, within Averda, we've been trialling the use of an AI system for all of our meetings, and that's had a phenomenal effect within the last few months of actually clarifying what was discussed. We have multiple meetings every day with different stakeholders in different countries, and the ability to refer to a report which provides some sophisticated insights into what was discussed alongside a recording of where there might have been some matters that might typically not have been documented has had a significant impact on our business.
Yeah, that's interesting that you talk about cross-border communication as well, and potentially people across different time zones, and having access to those real-time updates and insights is absolutely crucial for everybody to know where they stand, and that they're all on the same page. And in this more globalized world, I guess that's becoming even more critical.
I would agree with that. Look, the methods of delivering these buildings and these assets that we live in, they've evolved over thousands of years, and we're simply living through the next tech paradigm and how that influences things. Ultimately, we need early resolution of small claims. We need real-time recording of projects, and obviously to embrace a degree of digitalisation in managing contracts, change orders, invoices, and our correspondence.
Yeah. And in terms of if you've got quicker dispute resolution, obviously there's a financial impact to this as well. And we're always trying to tighten our waste belts according to the budget. So would you say that is a massive win as well financially if we're able to, so it's not just a time saving, but it's also a monetary saving? Yeah,
definitely. I think there are certainly scope for cost saving, but there's time saving, as you've identified. Video conferencing has proven a pretty effective means of conducting a high level mediation between parties, and that's something that we've discovered as Averda as a business. You've also got online dispute resolution platforms which allow for a high degree of negotiation between disputing parties. There's a Kibra platform in Saudi Arabia, which I was introduced to in Q4 of last year, which allows for the online submission of documents, and that's really helped to streamline the use of expert reports, which are referred back to courts on disputes which have construction matters typically come down to technical matters. And then there are online hearings, there are e-filings, and then I suppose if I speak to my colleagues within our legal team, they've also got electronic discovery tools as well, which have helped to streamline their job process.
Do you see any pushback, though, internally? Do you see there being some level of resistance? We talk about it a lot because technology is such a big change for some organisations and people are naturally resistant to change. Do you see some people being wary of the technological advancement that is now being implemented within our big organisations?
I would say yes, but I think you're going to find that in every walk of life. One thing that does frustrate me at the moment is I think that there's a dearth of protocols that identify how we're meant to be adopting new technology. I've anecdotally, within the last 2 or 3 weeks, if I refer back to this AI bot that I've been using to record my meetings, I've had 1 or 2 very, very negative responses to that bot being in a meeting, despite me having introduced him or her or it and said that they will be recording the meeting, the purpose of it, and that the report would be shared. And I think that's because there are a lack of protocols, and we're embracing technology. And obviously, as you've touched on, there is a strong degree of resistance from some people who are probably set in their ways and resistant to change.
And in terms of data hygiene, because you just touched upon it, the quality of data improving, data hygiene is such a big conversation at the moment. Do you see technology impacting the level of data hygiene? Because obviously it's all very well and good putting data into a system, but if it's not hygienic and if it's not done correctly, then actually the output is rubbish, so to speak. Would you say that the data hygiene is a focus on making sure that people are upskilled to the level where they know that the data you're putting in is as clean as possible?
I would agree with that to a very, very strong extent, and I think the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Qatar have identified the importance of data hygiene, and there's definitely a strong upskilling of nationals and resource and people involved within that system to identify where the data might not be telling the correct story.
How do you see the difference in technology and the use of technology? Because I'm really intrigued to know what the comparison would be between what we're seeing back in the UK and maybe in other parts of Europe, and then what we're seeing in the Middle East.
I think it's difficult to talk about the Middle East as if it's a homogenous region. I mean, my portfolio straddles Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, and the UAE, and they're very different markets with very, very different profiles. A lot of it comes down to regulation. There are different regulations in place in different markets. But I also think that the type of projects that are being undertaken and the procuring entities are different. So if we look at the Saudi Giga Projects program, which is a stupendously high value program that's being delivered in Saudi Arabia, you've got very, very strong top-down implementation from the developers, and that there's less of a requirement to regulate to regulate through legislation to put that sort of stuff in place. Whereas I suppose in terms of Oman, there are less people involved delivering the larger ticket projects, and so that gives its own subtle nuances to sort of the rollout and the adoption.
In terms of the work that you're doing at the CIOB, we had a conversation off camera, so I want to try and bring it back onto camera about the academy. Could you tell the listeners a little bit about that? Because I think it would be, of great interest.
Well, we've touched on digitisation, and one of the great advantages of the use of technology and digitisation is the delivery of training through online courses and through digital content, and that's something that the CIOB utilises through a separate platform on their website called the Academy. Now, if you're a CIOB member, you have access to the Academy. If you're some form of academic who's looking for a bit of research or is looking to take advantage of some of the publications that are published by the CIOB, then that's a very, very effective tool. But I also find when I'm walking around universities or I'm in at schools speaking to children who are making their career decisions and their A-level choices, I would say, well, actually, just get yourself a student membership. Have a look around the Academy. There's some quite interesting pieces of media there. There's some quite interesting papers and journalistic publications there. Have a look at that and see if that takes your fancy.
Construction has traditionally been seen as quite an archaic industry. Do you think the implementation of technology will draw and attract younger generations to want to be part of this industry moving forwards?
Undoubtedly, I think the challenges that you'll have from implementing technology can only be resolved by the younger generation who've actually, grappled with this from when they were yay high. You walk around construction sites and there may have been a decision made to allocate each section manager with an iPad or on their work phone. They need to upload an app to record something that they identify when they walk around on site. Mm-hmm. And there can be a bit of a stilted response. There can be a little bit of reluctance to implement that change. Now, when I walk around schools and colleges and I'm talking to pupils and young people about their career choices and their subject choices, I sometimes see them playing Minecraft. And it gets me thinking, if you took that game and you gave it to the section manager, I'd be very interested to see who's going to score better on a game of Minecraft. That child or that young person who's been familiar with it from yay high, or this chap or the lady who's been given it for the first time.
Yeah, no, interesting points. Recently, we were talking about the intersection between an older generation and a younger generation, and really the sweet spot for technological success in construction is bringing those two generations and merging their native skill sets. And I think that will be very interesting as we kind of go through time and we start to see older generations working with these younger, more digitally natives, how that dynamic works out and how it will obviously be of benefit. I really, truly believe it will be of benefit to the construction industry. On the note of the future then, do you see any future trends that are coming up in terms of construction, technology and the regulatory environment and indeed dispute resolution?
Keep harping on about it, digitalisation. I think there's going to be a stronger degree of digitalisation that will hopefully resolve some of the disconnect that you have between disputing parties. Mm-hmm. I think you'll see a stronger degree of efficiency in dispute resolution, in the management of claims that escalate to disputes at site level, and a stronger degree of clarity about what constitutes a scope of work, to avoid those escalating into unresolved variations that in turn escalate into disputes.
And costly variations as well.
Yes.
Talking about digitalization, is there anything in particular, because we talked a little bit about AI earlier on as well and it's becoming more prevalent, would you say that AI is potentially leading the way?
I think it's AI, but I think it's machine learning. Now, I think it's the machine learning of artificial intelligence. Now, I think in terms of simple machine learning, we're there. Mm-hmm. A construction site is a very, very sophisticated place. There's a lot going on. And I think we're very good at dealing with tagged data. Mm-hmm. When you're dealing with untagged data and you're having to deal with harder degrees of learning, that's where things, I think we've still got a way to go.
So John, in light of some of the comments that you've made, how optimistic are you feeling about the future of Middle Eastern construction?
I'm incredibly optimistic about the future of construction in the Middle East. We have a Young Members Association that's part of the Chartered Institute of Building. It's something called Tomorrow's Leaders. And exists for our younger construction professionals. We hosted a site inspection of the Royal Atlantis in May of this year. It was heavily oversubscribed. Anybody who's not familiar with the Royal Atlantis and they live in Dubai, that's that large giga project that's been under construction over on the Palm Jumeirah for the last few years. If you live on the Palm Jumeirah, you were probably phoning them up in January of this year, telling them to turn the music down because Beyonce was making rather a lot of noise at their opening party.
She was.
Now, if you're not based in Dubai, I'm pretty sure that you've seen it actually the international superstar DJ Tiesto featured a stunning walk through the public areas in one of his recent music videos. But we were walking around this giga project development, and the chap who was leading our tour was identifying, we've got X number of swimming pools here, we've got a cantilever structure here, we've got floor to window glass here, and a couple of hands went up and said, yeah, well, okay, what are you doing about water use within your development? Okay, what kind of green accreditation have you got in place? How are you minimising energy use? And I sort of looked back at that and I was like, actually, that's fascinating. And to be fair to him, he'd worked on a number of different developments in Hong Kong and in Australasia and in New York over the years. And he was very candid. He said, we conceptualized this project, 13 years ago. This wasn't high on the list of employers' requirements. If we were to go back and look at the Royal Atlantis now, then yes, issues of sustainability are going to come into play. And do you know who's going to be resolving those issues? It's going to be every single one of you who's here in this room attending this site inspection. So thank you very much for that question.
It's great that the environment is actually becoming a more prominent consideration for younger generations. You're even seeing that when people are going for jobs, they're asking companies, how environmentally conscious are they? And I think that's something that I definitely didn't feel or have at the forefront of my mind when I started looking for jobs when I first entered the world of work. So it's great that, obviously this is construction specific and probably more so a conversation, but it's great that just generally Gen Z are becoming far more conscious than any other generation that precedes them. Before I finish every podcast, I always ask my guests if they could give people advice, those that are wanting to get into the construction industry. What would that be?
Look, I've been in the construction industry now for 15 years, and it can feel incredibly frustrating. You will work with individuals who lack ambition, and you will encounter circumstances that challenge your professional judgment. But at the end of the day, we work in a fascinating industry where we grapple with fascinating problems. Mm-hmm. Now, if I bring it a little bit closer to home, we're less than 3 weeks out now from hosting COP28 in Dubai at the end of this month, where the global community will have to come together to try and find the pragmatism to agree on the measures to limit the increase in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees of their baseline. My employers, Averda, were actively involved in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, mm-hmm. and there was a global status report published for the construction industry that identified the construction sector was responsible for 34% of energy demand and 37% of energy and process-related carbon dioxide emissions. Mm. We are now living and working through the next techno-economic paradigm. We need to deal with these issues of environment, sustainability and governance and all that it implies for green infrastructure, for decoupling growth from the wasteful exploitation of natural resources and the transition to a circular economy. And if these are things that you want to be a part of, then I think the construction industry is where you need to be.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, John. I appreciate your time today, and no doubt the listeners will garner a great deal of insight from this conversation.
Thank you very much, Maddie.
Thank you.